Are you trying to establish your brand as a thought leader? Start a podcast, invite industry experts to be guests on your show, and watch your brand become the prime resource for decision makers in your industry. Learn more at sweetfishmedia.com.
You're listening to B2B Growth, a daily podcast for B2B leaders. We've interviewed names you've probably heard before, like Gary Vaynerchuk and Simon Sinek, but you've probably never heard from the majority of our guests. That's because the bulk of our interviews aren't with professional speakers and authors. Most of our guests are in the trenches leading sales and marketing teams. They're implementing strategy. They're experimenting with tactics. They're building the fastest growing B2B companies in the world. My name is James Carberry. I'm the founder of Sweetfish Media, a podcast agency for B2B brands, and I'm also one of the co-hosts of this show. When we're not interviewing sales and marketing leaders, you'll hear stories from behind the scenes of our own business. We'll share the ups and downs of our journey as we attempt to take over the world. Just kidding. Well, maybe. Let's get into the show.
Welcome back to B2B Growth. I am your host for today's episode, Nikki Ivy with Sweetfish Media. Guys, I've got with me today Jake Sorofman, who is CMO at Pendo.io. Jake, how you doing today?
Good. How are you, Nikki?
I'm doing well. Like I always say, it's the sun is shining in Austin, Texas. I cannot complain.
It shines a lot there.
It does. And so we are going to be talking about why product is the new marketing and how, satisfying customers isn't enough anymore. And Jake's going to talk to us about how to outright delight them. But before we get into that, I'd love for you, Jake, to just talk a little bit about your background and what you and the folks at Pendo have been up to these days.
Yeah, so thanks. Just a quick thumbnail on who I am. I joined Pendo about 2 years ago as CMO. Before that, I spent 5 years as a Gartner analyst. I was VP and Chief of Research for digital marketing and CMO topics at Gartner, which was a bit of a left turn in my career. Before that, I had spent 16, 17 years working in marketing with venture-backed software companies, most recently as a CMO. So I took a little bit of a left turn in my career to go sort of exercise different muscles and think about marketing in a different way, and then decided to come back to my roots a couple of years ago at Pendo. Pendo is a very fast-growing company. We're a SaaS company with a product cloud solution that combines sort of what you might think of as product analytics for understanding user behavior inside of any web or mobile application, together with customer feedback, so sentiment and understanding feature requests and being able to prioritize all those requests. And then also a guided engagement inside the application for driving feature adoption and onboarding of new users and cross-sell and upsell in-app, all as part of one integrated platform.
I love it. I don't actually get to talk to a lot of product folks or folks from product teams on this show. And so it's all new and fascinating to me, and I'm already delighted. So you win.
Awesome.
But I do want to dig into this concept of why product is the new marketing. Just give us, a high level explanation of what exactly that means.
So when I was at Gartner, I wrote a blog post that asked this really as a question: is product the new marketing? Because what I was seeing was increasingly brands were really unable to, the way I like to think about it is they can't hide behind a false brand promise anymore. There was a time when you could get away with pretty mediocre products if you had a really sharp message and really hard-hitting campaigns. Marketers could do a lot to paper over insufficiencies or sort of deficiencies, on the product side just by telling a great story or really having a compelling point of view. And that's no longer the case because your users now expect to try before they buy. They often expect to engage in some sort of trial or freemium variant of your product to experience the product and see its value firsthand. They're often relying on review sites and word of mouth, social proof, all as the basis for how they form opinions and make decisions and evaluate your product. That means your product itself needs to deliver that sort of value in a demonstrable way. It needs to sell itself in a sense.
Right. No, and you and I were talking about this offline, this idea that, just satisfying customer satisfaction isn't enough anymore. And that that initial try before you buy is your chance to nail it more so than leaning, like as we have before, as you pointed out, on, the story, how engaging your salespeople are, how effective your outbound marketing is. And so I think this is a really cool way to think about it. And what I want to hear more from you about is how this experience and that try before you buy, or how your customers or those prospects, how their experience early should dictate how you target prospects moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's all about first impressions. So particularly in sort of an inbound go-to-market motion where you do have some sort of trial or freemium product, it's all about ensuring that those first interactions, those first experiences are exceptional, and you're able to sort of hook the user on the product by demonstrating that you really connect with their need, and you do it in a way that's simple and intuitive and sort of self-describing. There's a book by a guy named Nir Eyal called Hooked, which really talks about behavioral economics in products and in thinking about how you design that sort of stickiness into the product. And one of the really important points is that those first experiences are what make those habits really take root. So really thinking about how you design that initial onboarding experience and guide your users to find value in the product so those habits can form and you can create the real sense of need that will drive the conversion into a paying customer. But it's more than just a first impression, because once they become a customer, the barriers to exit have been so dramatically reduced in the age of SaaS that it means that your customers can defect at any given moment. There are so many other alternatives and companies that are really trying to tap into a deeper understanding of that customer need state and satisfy it in that much more of an elegant way, that you're always at risk of losing customers if you're not continuing to engage with them and guide them to value and delight them in every moment that they interact with your product. So it's sort of a continuous process. The first transaction, landing them as a customer, is just the start.
100%. When you talk about forming a habit, I think that's the key piece right there. Because when I was selling these SaaS solutions and experiencing or really trying to capitalize on this low barrier for exit, right? There are salespeople right now calling your customers, having this conversation. They're going to throw as much salt in the wound of how easy it is to form habits with your product or not. And,
100%.
And particularly, I know you and I talked about my experience at Qualia, but particularly when your product is disrupting, say, a legacy industry or an industry where folks have been using the same product for a long time, then you get to figure out, if they're using the product for a long time just because they didn't know about an alternative, or because you really got them to form habits. And as a salesperson trying to convert someone from a competitor, that is one of the hardest things to be up against. Yes. I have all of my habits are tied into this platform, and so it doesn't make sense for me to move. Then you've got to demonstrate to try and convert these people how easy it will be to form habits in your platform. And then once you've got them, you got to keep doing the work of getting them, guiding them through forming those habits. And so you're spot on with that. And when you do that, right, that's when you come up to this next piece that you're going to get into with us, which was, that continued satisfaction or delight, as you put it, how that is going to dictate, retention. Talk a little bit about that for us.
Yeah, so good products will satisfy sort of articulated customer needs. Great products are able to anticipate and fulfill those needs in a way that is unexpected. So that's what I mean by delight. It's really the nuanced understanding of the customer need that's made manifest inside the product in really unexpected ways. And sometimes that it's hard to describe because it really depends on the specific user and the use case, but it shows up in pretty subtle ways. And it really requires a deep, really empathy for your user and understanding what they're trying to achieve with your application and sort of living in their skin a little bit to find those opportunities to really delight them inside the product. And I think that that's often what makes the difference, because checking boxes, just functional parity, is kind of table stakes. And it's just continuing to look for opportunities to make that product that much more delightful and that much more intuitive and that much more sort of empathetic to what your user is trying to achieve. That's what creates the renewed loyalty that you need to achieve. So loyalty isn't one and done. Loyalty is something that you earn over and over time.
For sure. Again, I love you pointing out functional parity, because I've seen actual sales script where the salesperson is talking to this person they're trying to convert, and that's what they're leaning on, right? They're leaning on telling this person, oh, we can do that. We can do that. Yeah, but do you make that easier to do?
Totally.
Right?
Yeah, the way I think about it is the competitive battlefield is really shifting from features to experiences. Virtually everyone can check those boxes. That's the easy part. But how you actually do it and how you render an experience that users want to engage in, that's where the real differentiation is. And this is increasingly the case as your customers are, there's a generational aspect to this. Your customers are showing up with certain expectations, and those expectations are shaped by consumer experiences with Apple and Amazon and Uber and other really design-led companies that have really sweat the details in how they deliver these digital experiences. And whether or not those are competitors for you, it's the point of comparison, and it's the new expectation.
100%. I think all of us experience that, as you're pointing out, in the B2C world, right? In how we engage with the product that we continue to use and consume. It's definitely this habit forming thing. It's definitely who's made it, not just the easier choice because they were catchier, but who's made it the easiest thing to keep up. And identifying who those folks are is the last piece that I'm excited to hear you sort of dig into. So once you've, understood that folks are going to want to try before they buy, and then you've sort of engineered and tailored, that initial experience to knock it out of the park in terms of product, right? And figured out how to guide them and help them form these good habits. Now you got to figure out who's formed the best habits and how to make them, speak for you. So dig into that a little bit for us.
Yeah, it's interesting. So it's sometimes hard to know who is deriving the most value from your products, who's most satisfied, who your power users are. And to the extent that you're using, and of course, this is what we do for a living. So I'll disclose, I come to this conversation with my own biases, but we provide the insight into user experience so you can start to really understand who are my power users. And then by measuring sentiment, who are the ones that really love this experience? And now you can tap into that to really kind of identify power users and activate your advocates to engage the flywheel of advocates who are referencing for you publicly and becoming public testimonials and essentially acting as your best sales force and your customer proof out in the wild. And the cycle continues. So that's a great way to drive awareness and credibility in the discovery and evaluation phase of the buying journey, which is, as we all know, becoming very self-directed. So having that content available is incredibly powerful for helping you to rise above the noise and to differentiate your capability. And then, of course, once they're intrigued, they want to try your product. So it's sort of this very closed loop cycle where the experience that you deliver begets, the advocates that you need. And then the advocates sort of invite prospects back into that experience. And that's what I mean by product is the new marketing. You can't hide behind a false brand promise. The product itself needs to do the selling either directly or indirectly.
Yeah, and you shouldn't want to, right? You shouldn't want to hide behind a false brand promise. I think a lot of people committing that sin don't know that they're doing it. I think
Totally.
Maybe they just, they're salespeople at heart or they're marketers at heart. And they get excited about their ability to move people with a message because that is a skill and that is an art and it's a science. But at the same time, it isn't going to be the thing that keeps people with you. I mean, it's like, I love dating analogies in business and sales, but it's like that, right? You could be I walk in, I'm the cute girl, the smooth girl. I can get anybody to believe what I say and come along with me and we're going on dates. But at the end of the day, if the substance isn't there, if I haven't, delighted, then, I lose. And then someone who maybe isn't the shiniest, prettiest new thing on the surface, who isn't manipulating a message with the same finesse, it's gonna win ultimately because they've figured out how to keep people coming back. And that is with the substance. I love this idea that product is the new marketer. I think you've made the case. I'm so glad that you came here to do that. And I think one of my favorite takeaways is this idea of activating your advocate. I think a lot of the time in sales and marketing, especially in marketing, there's this tendency to measure, the success of our efforts by, metrics that say, who's looking at us, right? Or even who likes us, but not necessarily who wants to keep us. That is a way tougher thing to measure. But if you're going to gain confidence from any metric, I think that's the one to sort of hang your hat on. And it's really exciting, like I said, the way that you laid that out. So now, Jake, now that I have successfully picked your brain and seen what I could get out of it, I am interested in what you put in it. Tell us about a learning resource that you've engaged with that has informed your approach or that's just got you excited these days.
Yeah, it's a great question. I get this question a fair amount, and the first thing I'll just tell you by way of disclosure is I hate business books. There's very few that I've read in my life that have really mattered. I find them kind of reductive and repetitive, with a few exceptions. So I'm not going to cite any boring business books because most of them are not all that worthwhile. I read pretty voraciously, and I like to read outside of business. So I read a lot of narrative journalism, narrative nonfiction, and there is a podcast that I listen to religiously on NPR called Long Form, which is interviews with journalists and writers and authors. I love to read, and I think that marketing at heart is about telling stories, and understanding the craft of finding those stories is super interesting to me. And I always walk away with new inspiration and transferable ideas. I think of it as it's almost like it's learning by analogy. It's learning from ideas outside your domain is often the best way to spark creativity, is looking right outside of the world you live in rather than, creating sort of the inbreeding of ideas that often come within one single domain. So no business books today.
I love it. Down with inbred ideas. And I think that's the third example of alliteration or assonance that you've given me today. And so we're friends. Awesome. I nerd out on these types of things. I've been writing them all down. And I think that one's my favorite. But yeah, first of all, you had me at NPR. I'll have to go out and listen to this podcast. And that's one of my favorite answers to date. Jake, I got to tell you, a lot of the time when I'm having these conversations and I'm taking notes, things I'm taking notes about have to do with, how I'm going to tee you up and how we're going to keep having this conversation and how it's going to flow. But my favorite times are when the notes I'm taking are just things I'm learning from the guest and from the person that I'm speaking with. You've given me that. I know you've given our listeners that today. So thank you. And I know you've made fans of a lot of them, and they're going to want to go out and follow you. Jake, tell us how we can connect with you.
So, and thank you, Nikki. It's good to be here. At Jake Sorofman on Twitter, and hit me on LinkedIn.
I definitely will. And I know these folks will too. Thank you so much, Jake.
Thank you. Really appreciate it. Take care.
We totally get it. We publish a ton of content on this podcast, and it can be a lot to keep up with. That's why we've started the B2B Growth Big Three, a no-fluff email that boils down our 3 biggest takeaways from an entire week of episodes. Sign up today at sweetfishmedia.com/big3. That's sweetfishmedia.com/big3.